Welcome back to Encyclopedia.zone. My name is Dr. Don Jolly. I am the editor-in-chief of Encyclopedia.zone, the internet's premier home for literary shitposting, and I apologize for vanishing off the face of the internet for 2 weeks. Obviously, we were in the final days getting ready to post our Mayhem update, and some unforeseen circumstances came up. I remember back in the late 90s, the early 2000s, there was sort of in the world of video game websites, there were two basic approaches, and I think everybody sort of charted themselves somewhere on this spectrum. You had the Something Awful approach, which was of generally low quality, but Something Awful updated every single day, and we'll be talking more about Something Awful later in this video. And then you had Old Man Murray, incredibly high quality, did not update that often. And I was always very confused. I was like, how hard can it be to get together a fucking HTML page and make it work? And I'm not about to tell you that there's like a ridiculous amount of work involved in it. It's just that sometimes life gets in the way. I had a death in the family a couple of weeks back. I talked about it a little bit on Twitter. But essentially, our plans for the Mayhem update got upended a little bit. And so we got so many excellent submissions in for this update that we're actually going to make it a series. This is something that I am stealing from Old Man Murray that would also divide its updates into multiple parts that would be updated serially. So we are going to have several Mayhem updates over the course of the next few weeks. And I hope that you will join us to check those out. The first Mayhem update is actually available right now at Encyclopedia.zone, and this was prepared by Container Core out at Zone House Northwest. He very graciously donated his time because he knew I was going through this difficulty, and put together an absolutely beautiful collection of posts, photo essays, and artwork centered on the recent troubles, the civic unrest that has gripped the United States of America. And also Container Core and CivRecord Zone House Northwest took a beautiful photo essay of the specific aftermath of one of the early nights of civil unrest in Portland, Oregon, which I really recommend you check out. So Mayhem Update Part 1, compiled, edited, and designed by Container Core of Zone House Northwest. Thank you so much, Container, is live right now at Encyclopedia.zone. And because I haven't done as many videos to promote it as I would traditionally like to, I would also like to remind you that our previous update, the Poetry Update, is also still available. This was edited by Mr. Max Roderick, and once again features designs and artwork by Container Core and CivRecord of Zone House Northwest. So you can check that out at the site right now. And in the previous video, which I believe is called Poetry Over Protest, you can see readings from the Encyclopedia Zone poets of their own work from the Poetry Update. I really recommend you check that out. You're going to have to scrub through a bunch of me talking bullshit, but like right at the end of the video there, you can see about 6 minutes of the poets reading over a beautiful Grapho Volivarant track called Cluster Church. So, Poetry Update, live at Encyclopedia.zone. Mayhem Update, Part 1, live at Encyclopedia.zone. More Mayhem Update coming soon at Encyclopedia.zone. Without further ado, and if you like what we're doing here at the channel and at Encyclopedia.zone, more generally, you can help us out at patreon.com/HRC2020. Going to be doing something with that, by the way. Anyway, sorry for the interruption of service. I know that people on Twitter have said, like, there's no need to apologize. You shouldn't feel guilty. And I appreciate that. I know that people are being very understanding. But, you know, I'm getting money on Patreon. I do take it seriously. And we need to get as many of the beautiful submissions that we've gotten in from artists and writers all over the world up and compiled on the zone. So more literary shit posting is in the pipe, ladies and gentlemen. So bear with us as we go through this difficult time, and keep in mind that we're more Old Man Murray than Something Awful, which once again is going to come to play later in the video. Thank you. Without further ado, let's get on with it and talk about the tyranny of spectacle. So what are we going to talk about today? As I said, we've been radio silent here on the channel for about 2 weeks, and in that 2 weeks, a lot has happened that is potentially worthy of being addressed in the form of a YouTube rant. Are we going to talk about race politics in the United States of America? Absolutely not. Are we going to talk about riots? No. Are we going to talk about protests? Also no. Are we going to talk about the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone? No. Are we going to talk about the corporate co-opting of a movement of popular outrage? Tempting, but no. We're going to focus on what's really important. And what's important, what is really at the top of the headlines right now, what the cool kids with their fingers on the pulse are focusing on, is that Lowtax is canceled. I repeat, Lowtax is canceled. Lowtax is over. He's a shithead. He's a bad person, and we got to eject him from the internet. Now, that sounds like I'm being very sarcastic, but the situation is that Rich Lowtax Kayanka, that's Lowtax's online handle, the founder and webmaster of somethingawful.com, which is, of course, a very storied early internet cultural node, has been... it's weird to talk about this because it's actually been pretty publicly known that he's had, violent interactions with women over the years. It has become a large focus of drama in recent days because Lowtax's previous 2 wives and his most recent girlfriend have all accused him of domestic violence. That's a very serious thing. I'm not trying to be dismissive of those claims or the people that filed them. And there's police reports. This has actually become a police matter in Lowtax's home state. And we're not going to get too deep into the actual ins and outs of that drama. If you're really interested in following it, there's a 900-page thread on the Something Awful forums, which, you can read even without an account. So best of luck digging through that one. But it's been sort of, public knowledge for a while that Lowtax has had this checkered history. He's talked about it openly on live streams. He's talked about his wife going to a domestic violence shelter. He's talked about, all of this stuff. And for whatever reason, because there's this large upswell of cancellations that are happening lately. It's happening in the comic book community, in the wrestling community. It's happening friggin' everywhere. And, I don't want to get into individual accusations. I definitely don't want to talk about the people, the victims or the prospective victims that, let's just say victims of, victims of violence that are involved here. They don't deserve any more publicity than, they specifically want. But it has become a subject of popular interest, specifically in the Something Awful community over the last few days. And it has led to a mass movement among remaining Something Awful forums posters to cancel Lowtax and to get control of the site away from him. And I think the common conception or the prevailing attitude is that they want to transfer ownership and at least administration of the forums to some guy named Jeffrey from Yospos. I have no fucking clue. I don't know anything about this. And, the thing that I'm more interested in is Lowtax as a cultural figure and sort of what this wave of cancellations represents in the attention economy of our present situation. So that's what we're going to talk about in Lowtax and the Tyranny of Spectacle. So Something Awful has become a sort of storied site. You know, it was a very large community around the turn of the century. That's when I was posting there, and I actually wrote for the front page of Something Awful very briefly. And for those of you that are younger or perhaps more mentally well-adjusted, so you just don't give a shit, Something Awful functions like this. You got the forums, which are a very large community, very diverse community, which has a bunch of different interests. It's pulled in a million different directions, and a lot of really influential online culture forums originated on Something Awful. Stuff like the Let's Plays. You could make an argument that like celebrity video game streamers and stuff actually started on Something Awful in a text format. This is where a lot of like some of the first memes that really broke through into mainstream consciousness, like "All Your Base or Belong to Us," started there. You know, there Something Awful is a very significant cultural hub. The forums, I should say, are a very significant cultural hub because Something Awful is not just the forums. It is also the front page. The front page is a daily updated comedy website, which has articles of various descriptions. And the way that it started is around 1998, 1999. I think it was 98. Lowtax was writing for Planet Quake. And he started Something Awful as a side project where he could put his writing on any topic. While he was at Planet Quake, he started a pretty interesting and very influential column. I don't know what to call it, but you know, Planet Quake obviously was a website covering Quake and the Quake community, and Lowtax started writing reviews of bad Quake 2 maps. This expanded to bad Half-Life maps, bad Quake maps, bad Doom maps, and this was called Cranky Steve's Haunted Whorehouse. So Lowtax sort of took this style, this behavior of like, we're going to dig through the massive information sluice of the internet and we're going to find bad shit. Now, what is meant by bad? I think originally it was just like low quality stuff made by people that are like maybe not as, you know, people who have a more elevated idea of themselves and their abilities than they perhaps demonstrate in, you know, creating functional Quake 2 maps, or movies or games or websites, whatever. And we're going to use them, and we're going to use making fun of them, discovering and making fun of these weird, bad internet artifacts. We're going to make that the platform for comedy writing. Specifically, we're going to take them down. We're going to talk about how shitty all this stuff is, and we're going to talk about it in a very hyperbolic way. Like, Cranky Steve's Haunted Whorehouse never talked about Quake 2 maps as if it's like, well, you know, I guess somebody made this who, like, has just started making levels, and they don't really understand how it works. That's not the idea. It's always the worst thing ever. It's the fucking... It's a fucking disaster. It's like getting fucked up the ass with a salad spinner, you know, like, I mean... It's that nostalgia critic thing where it's like just performative comedy hatred over and over and over again. But whereas like guys like the nostalgia critic are doing it with like common touchstone films that everybody remembers, well, he remembers them so you don't have to. That's the nice thing about the nostalgia critic. He takes on that burden for you. He's a little bit like Jesus Christ in that way. He takes on the burden of remembering. So that you don't have to. Instead of doing it with stuff that people are actually aware of just because it's been like foisted on them by marketing or whatever, it's like a big movie or a TV show that was on when you were a kid, Lowtax and Something Awful would actually dig stuff that would get no notoriety under the normal laws of the internet and would dig it up and use it as a platform for comedy. On the front page, which would feature, you know, a comedic article every single day, like clockwork, written by Lowtax and others, they would actually have a feature called the Awful Link of the Day, where they dig up, you know, somebody's website, you know, some bizarre little corner of the internet that honestly was like, you know, that you would never hear about otherwise, and they'd use it as a platform for comedy. And the things that they'd say about these sites, you know, and Something Awful also sort of made its bones on reviews, usually text reviews. Lowtax wrote a lot of them in the early years. Once again, Quake maps were a target. games, Nintendo ROMs. Eventually, under other writers, they talk about hentai games, which are very bizarre, usually with like piss or gender change dynamics. Bad movies, like stuff like the Polonia Brothers, which, I actually got turned on to the Polonia Brothers from Something Awful. So, I love the Polonia Brothers. So, I thank them for that. But the whole deal was to do this like almost anthropological digging through the information network of the internet to find these very obscure, very off-beam, very weird products, and then use slamming them and taking them down as a platform for comedy. Now, obviously, this really upset the people who were targeted by the, by the Something Awful, I don't know, what do you call it? Who were targeted by Something Awful. People did not take it well. I remember a guy named King Riol made Doom maps. Had a little fucking, GeoCities page or equivalent, where he would post all his Doom maps and he would talk about how he was like king shit and the greatest thing God had ever created. And, Lowtax drove this guy fucking nuts by making reviews of his shitty Doom maps. There's no reason that anybody should have paid any attention to King Riol. His maps were lousy, apparently. I've honestly never played them, but, he wasn't a big deal in the Doom community. People were not, falling head over heels for the latest King Riol release. The only fame that he ever got out of the internet was this sort of weird infamy, maybe better described as anti-fame, that he got out of being covered on Something Awful. And he, King Riol started a whole multi-year feud with Lowtax as a result. He would write him letters, "Dear Richard, the hounds are closing in." He'd threaten litigation, And people would mob onto him and tell him he sucks repeatedly because, they, like Lowtax, these are people that are reading his site, they see these weird artifacts of internet culture as a potential platform for their own performative hatred comedy writing. So, to an extent, the whole idea of the internet hate mob, which has become so omnipresent today, does have its roots in that basic Something Awful behavior. But, also to an extent, doxing people, exposing people to undue publicity is just something that would have happened anyway, as people became cognizant of the fact that with the internet, they at least have a little bit of the power that was traditionally ascribed to mass media. Prior to Something Awful, prior to that turn of the century moment where the web started to get really populated, I think the internet was more a collection of small communities, like very small communities, like friend groups, essentially. And they would trade wares and they would talk about television shows. You see Usenet posts, those sorts of things. But with Something Awful, like a large amount of people started to congregate on this one forum, and they realized that they could use the power of that audience to essentially make people famous against their will, and famous for reasons that they had not predicted and could not control. So this is why you get King Riol writing, "Dear Richard, I'm going to destroy you," because, King Riol, this is first of all, it's the most attention he's ever gotten, and it's clearly a guy who wants attention. The fact that it's negative attention irks him, but he can't leave it alone. It's that basic lolcow behavior, right? Where, like, you take somebody who wants attention, they start getting negative attention on a massive scale, and it turns into this weird, like I said, anti-fame, this weird infamy. And this has become, sort of entwined into the DNA of internet culture. So it makes a lot of sense to me that Lowtax would, and he has been the target of various online hate mobs in the past, but this is the largest and I think the most personally threatening that has ever been arrayed against him. To the point where I think he is actually going to give up control of the Something Awful forums, which, is his biggest contribution, biggest like structural contribution to the internet. I think he's actually going to give it up. I think the era of Lowtax is over. Lowtax has been canceled. And it does make a certain amount of poetic sense. There's a certain irony in the fact that he has been canceled by the basic behavior that he and people working for him and people inspired by him have applied to so many others over the years. I mean, when I talk about performative hatred, it's like it could get really vicious. I mean, sometimes it was funny, but like the something awful behavior it has this weird sort of bifurcated identity, right? Because on one hand, and what I really liked about it, and what I got out of it when I was posting there in the around the turn of the century when I was a kid, there is this anthropological aspect to it. Because rather than using the internet, just as a way to explore things that you were interested in extrinsically, things, interests that you had outside of the internet that you're taking to the internet and digging deeper into, this was examining the internet as a cultural sphere in and of itself and trying to find the most grotesque, the most bizarre, the most obscure shit you possibly could, and I still remember some of these things that got dredged up, like icy hot suntans, white rappers with, sort of custom Hondas that would post about their incredible rap skills, and they had these terrible tracks. The one that I remember the most, the one that I feel the most uncomfortable about, and that has really entered the infamy of history, is there was the first guy that Lowtax paid to write for the front page was this fella named Zach Parsons, and he was called Geist Editor because I think originally he had a site called Geist Mag, maybe Flava Country. Somebody had Flava Country. It doesn't matter. But he was a writer for another site that got involved in the Something Awful thing. And he had an awful link of the day where he talked about this woman who had stillborn babies, a whole series of stillborn babies that she preserved in vacuum bags. And she had a memorial website where she would take these preserved dead fetuses and dress them up and pretend that they were alive in some way. It was sort of this weird grief-fueled tribute. And she was featured by Geist Editor, and he, she did not appreciate it. I mean, obviously this was something very, very strange, but very personal for this woman, and, very tied into the death of multiple children, pretty serious thing to her. To use that as a platform for performative hate comedy really got her goat, and I understand why. And I remember that, and one of the things that Something Awful would do is when people like King Riol or like this poor woman with the stillborn babies, when they would get offended by being featured as an awful link of the day or whatever, they would make comedy out of the continued communication that you would have with this person. It's that lolcow behavior, like I said, when a person engages with the hate mob that's targeting them, that engagement becomes more platform for the performative hate comedy. And over the course of, I think there were several days where this woman was writing to Geist Editor, and Geist Editor was writing back with his sick owns. He told her, "Your poison womb is making heaven too fucking crowded," which, was a line that is still being quoted today. It shows up in that 900-page Lowtax thread. Something Awful has sort of reinvented itself many, many times over the years. I do know that there are many people on the forums now who consider themselves to be, representatives of a kinder and gentler version of the internet. But that aggression is still like that it is baked into the DNA of the place. And that line was controversial. People were disturbed by it, but a lot of people thought it was really, really funny. And it's still being used as a platform for jokes. So, that's the interesting thing about Something Awful. You've got this sort of, interesting engagement with the internet as an anthropological project. And then you've also got this performative hate comedy, which has gone in so many different directions over the years into the world of lolcows, kiwi farms, internet hate mobs writ large. I would say when Something Awful started, it was sort of apolitical. It became more politically heterodox as the years went on. I was permabanned in 2013, so I don't actually know really what's happened since then. But, I think this is a phenomenon that sort of exists outside of politics. This is about online culture and the kinds of behavior that get massive attention online. And so that was Lowtax's contribution to the DNA of the internet. That and the fact that he, by talent or circumstance, ended up being the webmaster who was in charge of, at least nominally, one of the largest communities in that sort of turn of the century explosion era of the internet. The forums are not, it's not like Lowtax is the editor of the forums or that he has some like tremendous power over them, he exists more at a remove. I mean, one of the common jokes on Something Awful is there's a front page, which is sort of a joke about how divorced the cultural node of the forums is from Lowtax's behavior on the front page. But I would say that behavior did become kind of an important, an important behavior for a lot of people that were posting there. And I think it's sort of become so omnipresent that people don't even realize that it's coming out of this style of comedy that Lowtax and the people around him sort of pioneered in the early days. And it is a very mean thing. People essentially are doing to Lowtax now what he did to tons and tons of people over the years. They're digging into stuff about his personal life that he does not want revealed. They are charting his behavior online as new developments in the drama. The more he engages with this, he just did a live stream, which was just bizarre over the weekend, where it's literally he's talking from a gaming chair, really small. The image of Lowtax is like small in the corner, and most of the screen is taken up with an animated GIF of two bulldogs fucking, and one of them vomits on the other. And he talked for 40 minutes about the accusations against him and how this is all so crazy and how if you believe that he beats women, then you're part of this online hate mob. And he's also conscious of the fact that he is performing a role that he has put other people into so often that he knows how it's going to be received. Throughout the live stream, he kept saying, "This is my meltdown. This is my meltdown stream." And then he'd get up to go get another taste of those Gold Belly cookies that he keeps in the freezer. Gold Belly being a premium cookie service that I believe his girlfriend said that he was spending all of the forum's money on. And so he knows that that's part of the comedy, that's part of the comedy that people are producing out of his doxing. And doxing is not exactly the word, but it's part of the comedy that people are producing out of his anti-fame. It's one of the platforms that people are using to own him. And so he's playing into it. It reminded me, there's an episode of The Twilight Zone. It's pretty much the only good episode that Earl Hammer Jr. Ever did. He kind of came in to The Twilight Zone in the 5th season. I think he did some stuff in the 4th season when they did an hour long, but there's an episode called Come Wander With Me about a young man who goes to Appalachia to learn old folk songs and then realizes that he's a character in an old folk song doomed to perform the role that has been ascribed to him by rural mythology. And Lowtax is very aware in this live stream, as fucking bizarre as it is, that he is performing a role in the larger meta-narrative of internet drama. But he's also powerless to change it, so he's sort of participating in his own destruction, his own cancellation consciously. It's one of the weirdest and most depressing things I've ever seen on the internet. This man helplessly trapped in a cultural mode that he helped shape, but unable to break out of it. He understands what he's doing, but he cannot help himself. And apparently he went on the Dick Show on Sunday. I don't know. I mean, my ability to actually follow all of the ins and outs, once again, this is a 900-page thread, is pretty fucking limited. But there's one thing that he said in that live stream that really stuck with me. And it's when he's sarcastically dismissing all of the accusations against him, right? He says, That's why we have lawyers. Like, yeah, anybody can file a police report. The police report is literally just what the police saw. And all these people are saying, you know, all cops are bastards, fuck the police, and now suddenly you believe a police report? Like, I need my day in court. I need my day in court. And, like, that's kind of at the heart of the problem, right? Because the issue is that people don't believe that the courts are going to deliver justice on these sorts of situations specifically, but just in general. The people that he's talking to have no faith in the legal system. As Lowtax himself has pointed out, these are people that are like 100% down with the ACAB thing. They do not trust law enforcement. And I'm not saying that it's bad to have lost trust in these institutions. I think that, you know, the situation that we're in right now is basically one where pretty much every public institution has, through ignorance or stupidity or like direct malevolence, subverted people's ability to have faith in it. The legal system is not trusted. Law enforcement is not trusted. Politicians are not trusted. The very existence of Donald Trump, in my opinion, is predicated on the fact that a large amount of Americans, you know, not a strict majority, but a large enough amount to win the Electoral College, essentially cast a vote of no confidence in the idea of a president. And I know that, you know, he's got this performative super president persona that he puts on, but like, it's so farcical. The whole thing has become a fucking joke. People are so faithless towards the institutions, the basic like legal and civic institutions of American life, and, you know, corporate institutions as well, that they are now in this position where they're just using any tool at their disposal to pursue justice as they perceive it. Only trust your fists. The police will never help you. That's a gang tag that I see a lot in this 900-page Something Awful thread. Are these people going out into the streets and punching cops? My suspicion is probably not the majority of them. But what they are doing is using their small amount of mass media clout, which they do have by virtue of being, you know, popular posters on a semi-popular website, and using it as an offensive weapon against a perceived enemy. So I'm not trying to, when I say like perceived enemy, I hedge my words like that. I'm not trying to diminish what Lowtax did. I'm not trying to brush it under the rug or say that, you know, he deserves a fair hearing. You know that I'm a supporter of Hillary Clinton, HRC 2020. You know, that's my position. That's where I am. And the reason I support Hillary Clinton, very basic. Outside of politics, she's still the only presidential candidate who directly killed a Something Awful Forums mod. Fuck the mods. And Lowtax is, of course, king mod, so on a certain level, fuck him. But, you know, he's an interesting figure in the history of the cultural evolution of the internet, and I think that this moment, the fact that he's, like, being canceled, is it's a minor but pretty interesting little development. And the reason for that is, like I said, we have entered this phase where people are profoundly alienated from faith in institutions that their parents and grandparents maybe put a little bit more stock in, or put a lot more stock in. It's a world where people do not feel that the system, quote unquote, is working on their behalf in any way. It is not going to advocate for victims. It is not going to protect people from violence or abuse. It is, in fact, going to cover up for violent people and abusive people. And, like, this is a criticism that people on both the right and the left have. Like, the nominal political divides in American life are united in their profound lack of faith in our existing institutions. But, as I said, these are people that are also have a certain amount of implicit faith in the institution of the internet, which is a form of mass media. So, you know, Lowtax also deserves everything that's coming his way because he banned Fiad. Fuck, man. You can't ban the Yad. Fuck You and Die was sort of the experimental shitposting forum on Something Awful. A lot of problematic behaviors. Not trying to minimize it, but a lot of funny posts. A lot of funny posters. Weird Twitter comes out of Fiad. But One of the earliest Fiad memes, and I think one of the funniest Fiad memes, was the Yorba Linda Water District. The Yorba Linda Water District was essentially a sort of meta joke that, as I interpreted it, was about manufacturing celebrity where no celebrity deserved to exist. As I said, Something Awful was about this sort of anthropological behavior of digging through the internet and finding these weird off-beam artifacts and then blowing them up as a platform for performative hate comedy. But the Yorba Linda Water District was not performative hate comedy. The Yorba Linda Water District was legitimately the government institution of the Water District of Yorba Linda, California, which is home of the Richard Nixon Presidential Library. And the Yorba Linda Water District had a little fucking website, and the joke was that they had the joke of the Yorba Linda Water District posting was that they had uploaded these massive images of themselves because the people who made the website did not understand that you had to post a compact size image for consumption on the internet. So there were massive images of the director and co-director of the Yorba Linda Water District, Arthur C. Korn and Michael J. Beveridge. And on Fiad, Arthur C. Korn and Michael J. Beveridge and the Water District in general became the focus of a lot of attention. They essentially made these minor bureaucrats into celebrities whose every move was covered. People would post about intrigue in the Water District, that Michael J. Beveridge was going to take it over, that Arthur C. Korn and Michael J. Beveridge were involved in a clandestine affair. Like they essentially created a celebrity out of a non-celebrity, not in a spirit of like total acrimony, but just, as a lark, as a fucking gag. And that is one of the most like that is the essential behavior of the Something Awful thing, which is like digging people out of obscurity and using it as a platform for comedy, divested of the aggressive, destructive, hateful side of it that was a part of so much of the other Something Awful posting, and that was directed and I'm not saying that Fiad was without a hateful edge in its behavior over the years, because of course that was present, but with the Yorba Linda Water District specifically, it was just the recognition that now that we have this platform, now that we have a large enough audience, we can create celebrities. We can do this mass media behavior ourselves, and yeah, no one can stop us, and there's no point to it, but this is now a power that we have access to, and people are using that power. The whole phenomena of being canceled, of being destroyed by internet posts, is essentially using that power as a political weapon. Does that mean that the people that are being canceled don't deserve to be ejected from polite society? No, it actually has nothing to do with whether they deserve it or don't deserve it. It's just that raw behavior, that use of mass media power. And when I say mass media power, it's like we traditionally think of that in terms of like television, radio, newspapers, 20th century mass media. But the internet is a mass media too. It's just a mass media that is more open to individual contribution. Essentially, if you've got an audience that is going to be exposed to your stuff, whether that audience is 10 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people, you have a certain amount of mass media pull. And what Fiad was doing with Yorba Linda Water District was using it in this like lackadaisical, funny way. And what Something Awful did more often was use it in this sort of aggressive way. And the whole phenomenon of cancel culture is essentially people using this individual power, like I said, as a political weapon, rightly or wrongly. They're using it as a political weapon because they believe that there are no, and I should, when I say because they believe, I'm making a lot of assumptions. I don't mean to speak for anybody, but in my opinion, it is because the people that are using this cancellation power now, so often, it's gotten very, very widespread. It's because they don't think that there is any other recourse for them. Once again, trust your fists. The police will never help you. These institutions are not going to be on your side. They are not going to help you out. They are not going to have the side of the poor and the abused and the victimized And so if you are to stand up for justice, you have to do it with whatever power you have available. And the power that most people are defaulting to at the moment, or when I say most people, but like the power that most internet posters are defaulting to, is that internet mass media power. Because obviously you do have people out in the streets right now. This is a very different exercise of power. Now, this, of course, reminds me of Guy Debord's The Society of the Spectacle. Now, Guy Debord was a situationist philosopher. He wrote The Society of the Spectacle in the late 1960s, and it's a piece of Marxist analysis of mass media, where he essentially says that the world that is described in mass media, the spectacular world, the world of television and radio and newspapers, because he's writing in the late 60s, seems more real than the direct material realm of our, day-to-day perceptions. When you see something on the movie screen, it's, 30 feet high and it glows in the dark. When you see something on television, it attains a stature that is beyond traditional reality. It is spectacular. And the power of the internet, being a mass media power, is inherently a spectacular power. It is the power to create, sustain, and direct spectacle. So, and I really recommend The Society of the Spectacle, by the way. I'm being very, very broad with how I'm talking about it, but I think it's a very useful book for understanding the effect of mass media in general. Anyway, I think that this moment of profound alienation from institutional power that we're in the middle of right now is very interesting, because you see people defaulting to the power of mass media, essentially and implicitly placing their faith in it as opposed to sort of more traditional sources of civic authority like law enforcement and the legal system. The idea of reforming our laws, appealing to our governments, this seems sort of remote and a little bit foolish, I think, to a lot of people. And instead, you see people just exercising this spectacular power, which is, in fact, open to them, at least in some small way. Because, anybody can post. You can get out and post, and if your post goes big, then you have just directed the spectacle. You have essentially grabbed this little bit of power and used it as you see fit. And people are relying on whatever piece of power they can grab, because there's this massive, vacuum of trust in institutions. But there is a lot of trust in the institution of mass media itself, even though people are, of course, very skeptical of cable news, stuff like that. I mean, and I think that kind of charts along generational lines. Once again, like older people have a tendency to be very invested in the particular brand of mass media that they consume. You got your MSNBC viewers, your Fox viewers, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody is divided up according to the particular flavor of political media that they choose to consume. And I've talked about that in pieces before. But the implicit faith that people have in the internet itself and the power of mass media as an equalizing agent does not seem to be diminished by this moment of alienation from institutional authority writ large. It seems to be getting more and more pronounced. And that is very fucking interesting. So, it was illegal to go outside for 2 months. The poor were the only ones doing it, the people in quote-unquote essential businesses. And then we had the killing of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd by a police officer in Minneapolis. And there was that moment, there was that week of just across the board rage and desire for vengeance. And really, that initial week, that first week after the killing of George Floyd, I saw it crossing every political line. I saw people that were, nominally right-wing, people that were left-wing, obviously. Everybody was united in being pissed off about this. And that week is when they burned down the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis, and that was when we had our first weekend of quote-unquote riots, protests, however you want to talk about it, across the country that were, that was a real spectacle. That was a real mass media spectacle. And not a mass media spectacle that was driven by television, newspapers. It was driven by the internet. People like Unicorn Riot, the streamers, the people giving, their on-the-ground accounts of what was going on. This was a big moment for the internet. We have a tendency to talk about current events in terms of the old media. When I say old media, I mean like 20th century mass media, the news cycles, the 24-hour cable news cycle, which is of course very influential, especially with older Americans, those sorts of things. But on the internet, I think that there's something a little bit more subtle. It's the attention cycle, which is people can only spend so much time posting about a particular thing. And so, initially, the uprisings and the violence in the streets and the various political solutions and governmental solutions that were being proposed, defunding police departments, I think being the most prominent, those were very much at the head of the attention cycle for probably those first couple of weeks. And it changed gradually to go from burning down police stations, sacking targets, those sorts of like direct material uprising moments, to the slightly more symbolic behavior of taking down statues, Confederate statues, slave owners, statues that are representative of America's frightful and embarrassing and shameful history of slavery. And, people can argue back and forth about whether this statue or that statue deserve to come down and to what degree they represent white supremacy. But, in general, this goes from direct material threats to the power structure, both corporate and governmental. Police stations and big box stores are both representatives of American hegemonic power that are very direct and visible on the streets, to taking on the street, direct, visible icons of power that are purely symbolic. Statues are symbols. So the attention cycle moved from sort of these much more threatening and much more violent acts of uprising to a slightly more symbolic variation of the same. And just looking at my feeds over the last couple of weeks, I think we have now entered a phase where there's this like rash of cancellations. And once again, I'm not evaluating any one particular cancellation for how valid it is or whatever, but it's a noticeable behavior. There's a rash of cancellations. These are sort of more virtual phenomenons. These are things that are happening on the internet. You don't actually have to go out and pull something down with ropes. It's not about material reality at all. It's about reputation. It's about reputational power. And it's happening in comic books. It's happening in wrestling. And of course, it is happening to Lowtax. This application of spectacle is even more symbolic than the statues. And I would argue that there is perhaps an arc that we can detect here that has to do with mass media in general. As time goes on, mass media will take any sense of popular outrage or any public project and direct it towards more and more and more symbolic targets. I mean, Lowtax is, of course, an actual person. The forums are how he makes his money, how he pays for his GTR. I don't know if he actually has that card, but, that's something that they're saying in the thread. Whatever. Anyway, he's an actual person, and he's having his reputation destroyed right now. But, arguably his reputation was destroyed before. Like, this has all been public knowledge. He's talked publicly about these domestic violence accusations. It's just now reaching this place where it's taking up a lot of attention cycles, specifically on, his forums that are going to eject him. And so, yeah, on that level, it's not a symbolic victory, but like Lowtax's importance, whatever importance he had, is like, it's not even historical. It's like cultural importance, less than 20 years old, related to online shitposting. And as much as I'm happy to be a literary shitposter or shitposter in general, this is perhaps not a very cosmically important thing. I would say that it is less important than tearing down a symbol of the Confederacy in the form of a statue or a statue of Andrew Jackson. And it is definitely less important and less threatening to the power structure at large than burning down a police precinct in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I would argue that what we are seeing here is the tendency of mass media, of the world of the spectacle, to take actual uprising, actual anger, and dematerialize it to direct it in increasingly symbolic avenues until you end up with something that is so symbolic that it poses no direct threat to the power structure that creates and maintains that mass media. Even the internet is created and maintained by primarily the corporate power structure. And Lowtax, getting rid of Lowtax does not threaten anybody except Lowtax. And as anybody who has seen him fight the film director Uwe Boll knows, Lowtax is the weakest man on planet Earth. He is not a high-value target. Does he deserve to get canceled? Yeah, probably, sure. But is canceling Lowtax vitally important to the cause of addressing the the plague of domestic abuse or the treatment of women in society? No. No, it is not. He is, like I said, extremely weak and extremely non-notable. There's a danger. You know, we have this moment where people are so pissed off, and they have a right to be, because everybody's out of work. It's, you know, people are paranoid about going outside. Every governmental entity seems to be telling us something different about how we should behave or what the necessary behaviors are to protect ourselves. Down here in Texas, where I live, we are currently living under 4 contradictory orders. You know, we got the city of Austin, which is telling us to do one thing. We're locked down, stay home, work safe until August. We've got Greg Abbott, who was saying that we were going to continue with our reopening and has now dialed it back because we are experiencing a second spike of COVID deaths. We've got the president disbanding the COVID task force. We've got the Department of Health. We've got at least 4 different narratives that we're being exposed to constantly. And, under these circumstances, even if you are the kind of person that is, that would be naturally inclined to place faith in, public institutions, how can you do so right now where all of those institutions are in a state of profound chaotic disagreement? People are now behaving according to their personal determination of what is right, what is safe, and what is ultimately going to accomplish their political ends and otherwise. Only trust your fists. The police will never help you once again. But because we've sort of defaulted to putting all of this attention and all of this faith into the spectacular world of mass media, which we do perhaps rightly feel like we have more direct control over than the sort of more obtuse power structures of corporate oligarchy and governmental oversight, these things that we, as just like people on the street, do not have an ability to directly affect immediately. As we're putting more and more implicit faith into mass media as a tool that we can use to accomplish our discrete goals, whatever those might be, I think that our goals are becoming less and less actual, less and less practical. They are becoming more symbol than they're becoming more symbol than actuality, and it's happening progressively. The thing that I keep thinking of when I think about the statues being pulled down, especially, is when I was in high school. Obviously, we were involved in the first Iraq War, and they actually, one day, I was in English class, and an announcement came over the loudspeakers telling us that this class was suspended, everybody was to sit in their seats, and there was going to be a broadcast. There was something important, something historical that we had to watch. And this, of course, caused a knot of anxiety to develop in my stomach, because the last time they'd done that, it was 9/11, and that was a pretty bad deal for all involved. But what it was a broadcast from Baghdad of a statue of Saddam Hussein being haphazardly pulled down by American soldiers. It was, I guess, supposed to be like the moment that we won the war. Of course, we didn't. The war would continue for many years thereafter. The statue was pulled down, as I said, haphazardly. It sort of went down in fits and starts. It was an embarrassing attempt at a propaganda broadcast. But it was just one more in a series, you know, because they happened progressively over the whole course of the Bush administration on into the Obama years, where we'd have these symbolic victories in the war on terror. The one that people really celebrated was the killing of Osama bin Laden. The statue, I don't think, made much of an impact, but like the aircraft carrier with Bush and the mission accomplished banner, the the shock and awe attack on Baghdad initially, like there were a million spectacular moments of victory in the war on terror, and none of them really seemed to add up to much. Did we win that war? No. It just kind of petered out and stopped commanding American attention cycles. And of course, it's still going on. We're still dropping. The CIA is completely off the leash in fucking Africa. You know, it's just not at the forefront of our reporting. We've still got shit going on in Syria and Lebanon, Afghanistan, and of course, Iraq, Iran. You know, the war on terror continues. It's just like, because you can't actually end a war on an abstract concept. The idea of reforming law enforcement in this country is so necessary. Like, anybody who's been out on the street and who has had enough poverty in their life to see how the police behave, you know, as a functional institution, and not just as something that you see on television or like an abstract idea, to see how they actually behave on the street, how they treat black people, how they treat, you know, down here in Texas, a big thing is how they treat Hispanics. You know that this needs to change. You know that they act like an occupying army, and they've got a ton of fucking military equipment. Reforming them, and, you know, I feel so weird using that word because everything is like super politicized right now. Defunding them, taking away their money, taking away their military equipment is such a necessary thing to just make our society on a base level humane enough to live in. And it's also discreetly achievable. I'm not saying that it would be easy, and I'm not saying that the government institutions that are responsible for it are going to be enthusiastic about reforming themselves or changing the allocation of their funds, but it is something that is actually answerable to human control. Like, somebody is dispersing that money, somebody is deciding how these cops get trained, somebody is deciding all of this stuff. It is actually answerable to direct human intervention. The idea of defunding the police is a discrete and achievable goal. But in the weeks since the burning of the 3rd Precinct in Minneapolis, when, you know, victories, or, you know, when there were benchmarks of progress towards at least registering how fucking pissed off everybody was, and there were actual, like, threats being made against the extant power structure, it has cooled. And it has developed once again in this spectacular direction. It has gone towards more and more symbolic targets until now, you know, Doritos, Kotaku, fucking all of these fucking shitty corporate Twitter accounts are all on board with, like, Black Lives Matter, we're going to end racism. I saw a clip, I think it was on CNN, of Elmo's dad talking to Elmo from Sesame Street to explain to kids what's going on with the protests. And Elmo's dad says to his son, "They're out in the streets trying to end racism forever, Elmo." I got bad news for Elmo. You can't win a war on racism. Racism is an abstract concept. You can dismantle racist systems of oppression that exist within civic society and exist within, you know, the way that we educate people, the way that we behave in the law. You can dismantle those systems. You can desegregate the bus lines in Alabama. That is an achievable political goal. Once again, that does not mean that it would be easy to do, but, you know, they figured it out back in the 60s. This is an actual, discrete, achievable thing. You cannot win a war on an idea. You cannot. Well, racism is not necessarily an idea. It's an it's an abstract concept. It exists within the hearts and minds of people. Like terror, like drugs, you can fight these things forever. And you can have a million discrete little victories that just add up to nothing in the end. I don't think that spectacular power, that the world of mass media is totally false or phony, or that the power that people command through it is not actual. I believe that it does have a demonstrable effect on things, but I think it might not be where we want to put all of our eggs, and we might need to be conscious of the effect that putting our faith, implicitly or explicitly, in this institution is having on our political goals and our ability to achieve them. So thanks for putting up with that rant. We're going to have more for you at encyclopedia.zone very soon. And once again, check out the Mayhem update and the Poetry update, which were prepared by Zone House Northwest. The Poetry update edited by Max Roderick, both designed by Container Core, with help from Civ Wrecker out at Zone House Northwest. You can check it out at encyclopedia.zone right now. And thank you once again for putting up with the absence.